Welcome, everyone. We are pleased to have you today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise your right hands. This is where it gets real. Do you solemnly swear to affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. We appreciate all of you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Thank you. I will now recognize Mr. Elizondo for his opening statement.
Greetings, Chairwoman Mace, Chairman Grothman, Ranking Members Connolly and Garcia, and members of the committee. It is my honor and privilege to testify before you on the issue of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, formerly known as UFOs. On behalf of our brave men and women in uniform and across the intelligence community, as well as my fellow Americans who have awaited this day, thank you for your leadership on this important matter. Let me be clear. UAP are real. Advanced technologies not made by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe. Furthermore, the U.S. is in possession of UAP technologies, as are some of our adversaries. I believe we are in the midst of a multi-decade secretive arms race, one funded by misallocated taxpayer dollars and hidden from our elected representatives and oversight bodies. For many years, I was entrusted with protecting some of our nation's most sensitive programs. In my last position, I managed a special access program on behalf of the White House and the National Security Council. As such, I appreciate the need to protect certain sensitive intelligence and military information. I consider my oath to protect secrets as sacred, and I will always put the safety of the American people first. With that said, I also understand the consequences of excessive secrecy and stovepiping. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the aftermath of 9/11, which many of us remember all too well. I believe that America's greatness depends on three elements. A watchful Congress, B, a responsive executive branch, and C, an informed public. Over the last decade and a half, I learned that certain UAP programs were and are operating without any of these elements. Although much of my government work on the UAP subject still remains classified, excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos. A small cadre within our own government involved in the UAP topic has created a culture of suppression and intimidation that I've personally been victim to, along with many of my former colleagues. This includes unwarranted criminal investigations, harassment, and efforts to destroy one's credibility. Most Americans would be shocked to learn that the Pentagon's very own Public Affairs Office openly employs a professional psychological operations officer as the singular point of contact for any UAP-related inquiries from citizens and the media. This is unacceptable. Many of my former colleagues and I have provided classified testimony to both the Department of Defense and the Intelligence Community Inspector General, and many of us have subsequently been targeted by this cabal with threats to our careers, our security clearances, and even our lives. This is not hyperbole, but a genuine fact, and this is wrong. To fix these problems, I propose three principal actions. First, Congress and the President should create a single point of contact responsible for a whole-of-government approach to the UAP issue. Currently, the White House, CIA, NASA, the Pentagon, Department of Energy, and others play a role, but no one seems to be in charge, leading to unchecked power and corruption. Second, we need a national UAP strategy that will promote transparency and help restore the American public's trust at a time when the public's trust is at an all-time low. This strategy should include a whole-of-government approach, including the academic and scientific communities, the private sector, and our international partners and allies. Third, Congress should create a protected environment so whistleblowers desperate to do the right thing can come forward without fear. As it currently stands, these whistleblowers suffer because of stigma, a code of silence, and concerns about retaliation. These whistleblowers should be encouraged to come forward in ways that protect them against any forms of retaliation. Policies and procedures should ensure that protection, and for those who refuse to cooperate, it is up to the members of this committee and the other lawmakers to wield their subpoena power against hostile witnesses and prevent additional government funding to those UAP efforts that remain hidden from congressional oversight. In closing, we as Americans have never been afraid of a challenge. In fact, we thrive on them, whether it's eradicating polio or going to the moon. We don't run from a challenge, we take it head on. To the incoming administration and Congress, I say to you, we need immediate public transparency, and this hearing is an important step on that journey. If we approach the UAP topic in the same way as we as Americans have met other challenges, we can restore our faith in our government institutions. Together, we can usher in a new era of accountable government and scientific discovery. I believe that we as Americans can handle the truth, and I also believe the world deserves the truth. Thank you, esteemed members of Congress, for your time today. It is profoundly appreciated by many.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent for Representatives Ogles of Tennessee and Boebert of Colorado to be waived onto the subcommittee for today's joint subcommittee hearing for the purpose of asking questions. Without objection, so ordered. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. I have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of witnesses. So I would just ask if it's yes or no to please just tell me yes or no. If it requires more than that, be very succinct because I would like to go down the line and ask as many questions as possible. So, all right. Okay, Mr. Elizondo, you state in your testimony that, quote, advanced technologies not by our government or any other government are monitoring sensitive military installations around the globe, end quote. If these technologies are not made by any government, who's making them? Private companies, or are you implying they are crafted by a non-human intelligence?
Well, ma'am, that's precisely why we're here. The problem is that, temporally speaking, over decades, not just the last 10 years, to put this in perspective,
are these private companies you're implying, or is this non-human intelligence?
It may be both.
Okay.
When it comes to Blue Force Technologies, I would not be able to discuss
okay.
it.
Are you read into secret UAP crash retrieval programs?
We would have to have a conversation in a closed session, ma'am. I signed documentation 3 years ago that restricts my ability to discuss specifically crash retrievals. I submitted for my book through the DOPSR process, which took a year for it to be reviewed. And what is in the book is what I was told I'm allowed to talk about.
Has the government conducted secret UAP crash retrieval programs, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Were they designed to identify and reverse engineer alien craft, yes or no?
Yes.
Does the U.S. government have any reverse, okay, we already answered that question about retrieval programs. Do any U.S. contractors have the same?
I would prefer to address that in a closed session, ma'am.
Okay. In your book, you mentioned government employees who've been injured by UAPs, placed on leave, and receiving government compensation for their injuries. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How can the government deny we have recovered craft if they're paying people because they've been injured by recovered craft?
Ma'am, that's a great question. That's why I think we're here again, because I've seen the documentation by the U.S. government for several of these individuals who have sustained injuries as a result of a UAP incident.
It's a crazy idea, right? The hypocrisy and the logic.
Mr. Elizondo, did I have that correct?
Sir.
I'm a recovering lawyer, so I'm going to put my hat on for a second. You said you signed a document. Love that. Who gave that to you?
The U.S. government, sir.
Okay. You have a copy of it?
It is stored in a SCIF right now. I do not have possession of it. The U.S. government does.
What department of the U.S. government gave you this document?
I will say the Department of Defense. Unfortunately, I can't say in this forum much more than that.
You specifically said the document said you can't talk about crash retrieval. Well, you can't talk about Fight Club if there's no Fight Club.
Correct.
Okay, I'm just making an observation.
Yes, sir.
So that document that you signed, that you said exists, specifically said you can't talk about crash retrieval.
Correct, sir. It was a limitation on because already I'd been speaking publicly about the topic, and so the document said you can continue saying X, Y, Z, but you cannot discuss the topic of crash retrievals.
Give me the atmosphere of signing this document. You're in a room by yourself?
I'm in a SCIF with a security officer, sir.
Just one-on-one? Anybody else?
There may have been an assistant as well. It was in a SCIF within a Department of Defense facility.
Give me your background real quick.
My background is I went to school to study microbiology and immunology, entered into the U.S. Army, and after a very short stint in military intelligence, I became a counterintelligence special agent. As a civilian, later on I became a special agent in charge, running investigations in counterterrorism and counterespionage primarily, with some experience in counterinsurgency and counternarcotics. And then in 2009 timeframe, when I came back to the Pentagon after a tour with the Director of National Intelligence, I quickly became part of a program that was originally called OSAP that evolved into the program now called ATIP, which is where those videos that we now see, the Go Fast, the Gimbal, the FLIR, that was part of our effort, sir.
Right. So you're not some conspiracy theorist. You actually have a legitimate background.
Well, sir, I'm certainly not a conspiracy theorist. I'm fact-based, just say facts.
So when you're in this room, I want to paint the picture of everybody. You're in this room, you're by yourself, you're in a skiff, you're handed a document. How long is the document?
It's about a page front and back. So basically you have some things they call trigraphs, which I cannot, again, talk to.
How long were you given to sign the document?
As long as I needed, sir.
And what if you didn't sign it?
Well, I suspect there'd be repercussions. I wouldn't have access to certain information.
Were you allowed to ask a lawyer, or weren't allowed to ask for a lawyer to review the document?
It wasn't an option, but they probably wouldn't have allowed me to, because the document itself is pretty explicit about you have to be. Wait, you're putting me in an interest. Let me try to thread the needle here. There are certain documents that we have in the U.S. government that allow people to have access to certain programs, whether it's a special, and I'm going to be very generic here, whether it's a special access program or a controlled access program, SAP, CAP, whatnot.
How many people have to sign that document?
It depends how many people are going to get access to the information, sir.
Okay.
Okay. We'll go to Mr. Elizondo. Hope I got that right, or not at least
Close
not
enough,
sir. You're familiar with the recent drone incursion over Langley Air Force Base?
Yes, sir.
The owners of these drones remain unclear. The U.S. military has not been able to give us in Congress an answer. Given your experience with the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, how frequently are UAP sightings over military installations? And secondly, I suppose hypothetically you could have incursions over just, say, regular airports. Is it obvious these incursions are more likely over military facilities than just a random airport out there?
Yes, sir. There's definitely enough data to suggest that there is certainly some sort of relationship between sensitive U.S. military installations, also some of our nuclear equities, and also some of our Department of Energy sites. There is a long historical record that some of your colleagues may have, documentation that demonstrates this. This is not a new trend. This has been going on for decades, and that information has been obfuscated, unfortunately, from folks like you in this committee. And I think that's problematic, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a significant situation here. We have something that can enter into U.S. airspace completely with no attribution.
And how long has this been going on?
Sir, decades. And there's information that will hopefully be entered into the record.
Can you think of any possible reason why they can't release any information they have on something, say, 15 or 20 years old?
Sir, if I could echo my colleague here, Admiral Gallaudet, I think one of the big issues that we have in the intelligence community, Department of Defense, is we don't want to broadcast any potential vulnerabilities or weaknesses in our national defense systems or on intelligence collection platforms. Therefore, when you have a conversation where you address a problem for which there is no solution, it makes that a very uncomfortable conversation to have.
Okay, I will now recognize Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I request unanimous consent to enter into the record documents provided to us regarding legacy UAP programs and psychological operations. Lou Elizondo.
So ordered.
I also want to thank my buddy Jeremy Corbell for providing us documents and access to some whistleblowers. Mr. Elizondo, what is your last position with the federal government?
Sir, I was the Director of National Program Special Management Staff, managing a White House Special Access Program on behalf of the National Security Council.
How would you characterize UAPs?
An enigma, sir, and a frustration. We're talking about technologies that can outperform anything we have in our inventory. And if this was an adversarial technology, this would be an intelligence failure eclipsing that of 9/11 by an order of magnitude.
Are there classified Department of Defense materials related to UAPs that you believe could be safely disclosed to the public without compromising national security?
Yes, sir, I do. I would never, ever try to endorse providing some sort of information that could compromise what we call a blue force technology or capability. But I do believe there's a lot of information regarding this topic, and I've been very vocal about it, that should be shared not only with the public, but most importantly, with members of Congress.
Are you familiar with my friend David Grush?
Absolutely, sir. I had the privilege and honor of working with him myself several years ago at U.S. Space Force.
Last year, as you know, he testified that the U.S. has run a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Are there UAP programs operating without proper congressional oversight?
100%.
What are they?
Unfortunately, sir, I would have to have that conversation in a closed session.
I know you said that, and a lot of people are frustrated with those kind of answers, but we're asking those kind of questions so you all know what the heck we're up against. You also mentioned in your opening statement that the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office employs a psychological operations officer as the singular point of contact for UAP-related inquiries. Why the heck would they do that?
Sir, that's a great question. I would ask the Pentagon. There's a long history here of that individual providing misleading and false information to the public through various news outlets and media outlets in order to discredit this topic. I've personally been victim to it. We have the documentation to substantiate where this information has been absolutely inaccurate, that has been provided time and time again, and it turns out that that individual was also working with former leadership of Arrow at the time as well.
And we punish them by giving them multi-million dollars more than they ask for every year.
In this report, Mr. Elizondo, for reference, several types of allegedly alien craft or possibly alien craft or unknown aerial phenomena, what we used to call UFOs, are described. Spheres and orbs, discs and saucers, oval or tic-tac, triangular shape, boomerang and arrowhead, and irregular or organic. Mr. Elizondo, does that summarize to you the types of craft that we're discussing today?
Sir, that is a general morphology, historically speaking, of many UAP.
So those descriptions are very different craft. Is it your assessment that they would come of different origins?
It's possible, but it also could be in sense a matter of utility. And let me just state for the record, I never read the report that or the article that Mr. Schellenberger put out. The reason
That's a good point. We're just referencing it.
Yes, sir.
For descriptive purposes for the American people.
Mr. Elizondo, to your knowledge, can you name the country and around time frame that the first back engineered UAP program started?
Ma'am, unfortunately, I would not be able to have that conversation in public.
Can anyone on the panel name that?
I cannot.
None of you? Okay. Mr. Elizondo, in regards to these aircraft being piloted by whatever they might be, non-human biologics, would you agree that it's likely that they are being piloted by some mind-body connection?
Ma'am, I think it is safe to presume here that they are being intelligently controlled because some cases seem to anticipate our maneuvers, and in other cases they seem to, I came across an email where the word stalked was used in a very secure email between Navy officers discussing their ships being pursued by a UAP.
In our previous panel, we had Grush, and he had testified to say that some of these were interdimensional beings. Can you speak on that at all?
Ma'am, I'm not qualified, certainly as a scientist or otherwise, to speculate points of origin. I looked at everything from a scientific perspective. So if you look at, for example, instantaneous acceleration, which was one of the observables of the program that I belong to, ATIP, the human body can withstand about 9 G-forces for a short period of time before you suffer negative biological consequences, blackouts and ultimately redouts and even death. Comparison, our best technology, the F-16, which is it's an older platform, but one of our most highly maneuverable aircraft, manned aircraft, made by General Dynamics, can perform about 17 or 18 G-forces before you start having structural failure, meaning that the airframe begins to disintegrate while you're flying. The vehicles we're talking about are performing in excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs.
So I guess would it be safe to infer that they're living craft?
I'm not prepared at this point to state for the record is something alive or not, because even that definition is hard. There was a time in science we thought that life required oxygen, and we now know that's not true. There are anaerobic bacteria that thrive in oxygen environments that lack oxygen. And so also the same with photosynthesis. When I was in college, I was told everything is derived from photosynthesis as a form of energy. In reality, that's not true. There are things that live off of chemosynthesis. So we're constantly having to reevaluate our understanding of what the definition of life is.
Mm-hmm. Do any of you ever come across reports from people that claim to have firsthand experiences with these entities, whatever they might be, or these aircraft, and then as a result, whether or not they're religious, find that these things will automatically disappear? Anyone, and this is open to any of you on the panel. So just real quick, because I'm running out of time. Lou?
Ma'am, I've always been a nuts and bolts kind of guy. When I was at ATIP, I was focusing more on the performance characteristics and less on the potential occupants.
Okay, the reason I ask is because it seems like, just based on our conversations, that we've had people that say that there are good and bad of whatever these things are. And so my concern from a national security perspective is A, that true? B, are you guys hearing the reports of that? And C,
I want to just start by just asking everyone on the panel or witnesses, and I had a chance to read all the testimony before, but just to set the agenda, just if we can go down real briefly, do you believe, just for the record, that the federal government, any part of the federal government, is knowingly concealing evidence about UAPs from the public?
Yes, sir.
100%.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. I also want to just go down the line. I know many of you have already said this, but I just, for the record again, just briefly, what do you believe UAPs could be or are?
Strong evidence that they are non-human, higher intelligence.
I echo my colleague's comment, sir.
Genuinely do not know.
Don't know, but we must find out.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those answers, gentlemen. I think this is obviously another remarkable hearing with just really important information, so I thank all of you for answering the questions.
So, and you, Mr. Elizondo, you said in your report and your testimony today, a government work on the UAP subject still remains classified. Excessive secrecy has led to grave misdeeds against loyal civil servants, military personnel, and the public, all to hide the fact that we are not alone in the cosmos. Fair?
Yes, sir.
All right. And all of you, and Mr. Schellenberger, by the way, I've read several of your books, Mr. Schellenberger, excellent stuff.
Thank you.
What I would say, too, is you were asked about the veracity of the author of this report. You comfortable with the veracity?
Yes.
Okay. And then, and I'll get to you in a second, Mr. Gold. We'll talk about Kunian and Lakatoshan scientific advancement and how we're obviating that through these processes. But we'll get to that in a sec. Because what I want to really get to is the ultimate question really becomes this. For what purpose is the federal government overclassifying, because that's what they're doing, they're overclassifying, and forbidding the public for getting access to this? And if you know, if you have an explanation, I'm curious, because I know what I've been told. I just want to know from your perspective, why do they overclassify? Mr. Elizondo, you look like your finger on the button ready to go.
Yes, sir. Forgive me. I think there's several reasons. I think at the time when this reality became evident to the U.S. government, we were in the middle of the Cold War with then Soviet Union, and we did not want to tip our hands to what our knowledge base was on this topic. We did not want to broadcast that to
Cold War's long over.
It is, sir. It is, sir. There's also then the philosophical argument that the Department of Defense and the intelligence community is solution-oriented. And when you don't have answers, it's a really tough spot to be in.
It's easier to be quiet and suppressed than if you don't have the answer.
Indeed, sir. In fact, there's a very real example when we built the U-2 spy plane and flew it over then Russia, and we're taking reconnaissance. And when we first started flying the aircraft, it flew so high and so fast we thought they weren't tracking us. In reality, they were tracking every flight. It wasn't until the Russians could develop the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shoot them down.
I would suggest to you also, along with Lakatos and Kuhn, you also have a problem with Kenneth Arrow's path dependence or increasing returns. That's one reason why they won't disclose it. It's too painful to admit.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Elizondo, does any branch of the United States government or defense contractors possess technology?
Sir, there's documentation that I believe was submitted for the record that was approved for release by the U.S. Pentagon, by the Department of Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, and it states one of the reasons why my predecessor program, OSAP, was trying to collect material of unknown origin.
Was it successfully collected?
It was not. What happened is that there was an aerospace contract company that requested to divest itself of the material that was collected in the 1950s. Unfortunately, that didn't actually occur.
So let's dive into that. That's the Bigelow Airspace, correct? So
yes, sir.
There was a journalist, Christopher Sharp, who said that there was a transfer between Lockheed Martin, Bigelow Airspace, and the CIA allegedly blocked this. Can you describe that?
What I can say is that it was blocked. Why it was blocked, I can only surmise. I was part of some conversations later on with some of those contract personnel where they had told all of us that is accurate. What we required was a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force in order to make that complete, and that never occurred. And so when Secretary Mattis became Secretary of Defense, I decided it would be appropriate for me to try to receive a memo from him as SecDef, as Secretary of Defense, if we could not get a memo from the Secretary of the Air Force to transfer that material.
So if that material exists today, who's in possession?
Sir, I wouldn't be able to have that conversation in an open hearing. We'd probably have to have that.
Okay, my question to you then is, if we were in a secure setting, if we were in a SCIF, would you be able to provide or get access to something, whether it's visuals or material that we could put our hands on, or biologics, that would convince me, that would show me that we have non-human origins?
Sir, that decision would not be mine. That would be to the gatekeeper still in the U.S. government.
And who would we, so if you were in our shoes, where would you go from here? How would you get that information? A lot of times we just don't know who to ask because we don't know where to go next. So if you were in our shoes, where would you go?
Well, I prefer to answer that question in a closed session. However, we established Aero for that very purpose, and unfortunately, under its previous leadership, it failed. So one would hope that they would have the authorities necessary to do that. Let's hope that this new iteration of leadership will be successful.
In the discussions, it's simply about material, or is there discussion about it was previously testified that there was biologics that were collected. Are you aware of any of that?
I am, sir, aware of the reporting that biologics have been recovered. Again, my focus was more nuts and bolts, looking at the physical aspects of these phenomenon, how they interacted around military equities and nuclear equities. So I'm certainly not a medical expert. I would not be able to probably provide you a whole lot of value in that simply because I don't have the expertise.
But was anything described as that we have possession of bodies?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Is it multiple types of creatures, or?
Sir, I couldn't answer that. I can tell you anecdotally that it was discussed quite a bit when I was at the Pentagon. The problem is the supposed collection of these biological samples occurred before my time, in fact, before I was even born.
And was this part of the Lockheed Martin discussion, or was this the biologics is a completely separate?
Separate yet related.
Okay. Has anyone made contact?
Sir, I'm sorry, could you specify?
Has there been to your knowledge, any communication with a non-human life form?
So the term communication is a bit of a trick word because there's verbal communication like we're having now. The problem is you also have nonverbal communication. And so I would say definitively yes, but from a nonverbal meaning, when a Russian reconnaissance aircraft comes into U.S. airspace, we scramble two F-22s, and we are certainly communicating intent and capability. I think the same goes with this. We have these things that are being observed over controlled U.S. airspace, and they're not really doing a good job hiding themselves. They're making it pretty obvious they have the ability to even interfere with our nuclear equities and our nuclear readiness.
Is the United States government and our contractors, are they pulling technology from this? They're reverse engineering this?
Sir, as I previously stated, and please forgive me, I am not authorized to discuss specifics about crash retrievals. I signed documentation with the U.S. government. What I can say was, after a very thorough review process by the Pentagon, what I wrote about. And that was my limit, unfortunately, that I was given.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I would like to recognize Mr. Timmons for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Elizondo, you just said something interesting. You said they don't seem to be hiding. They don't seem to be hiding. The UAP sightings are becoming increasingly brash, if you will. And, we've been hearing about these for years, but they've generally been isolated and not as consistent and over-critical military installations. Would you say that's fair? Is this becoming increasingly often? Is it happening more and more?
Great question, sir. Let me see if I can answer this for you. Certainly, there seems to be some indication that they're being provocative, meaning that they're, in some cases, literally splitting aircraft formations right down the middle. So that's an air safety issue. The question is it the frequency increasing? And really the response is it depends. Yes, it's possible that there is an increase in frequency, but it's also possible that there's heightened awareness now, and there's also more pervasiveness of technology out there that's collecting this information and that can record this information. So we're not quite sure yet if it's actually an increase in numbers of these events, or is it that we have better equipment now that to record these things, and we have a better ability, if you will, to analyze these things.
And that's my next question. It seems that a lot of these sightings occur near military installations. Do you think that these UAPs are intentionally targeting military installations, or do you think that we have increased abilities to monitor surrounding the military installations?
Sir, maybe both. Part of my concern is we have something in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community called IPB, Initial Preparations of the Battle Space. And we use equities like ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or other type of equities and technologies to prep the battle space. And certainly, if I was wearing my national security hat, even if there was a 2% chance that there was some sort of hostile intent here, that's 2% higher than we really can accept. And so we must figure out, there's a calculus, capabilities versus intent, in order to identify if something is a national security threat. We've seen some of the capabilities, yet we have no idea in the intent. And so this is why this discussion is somewhat, I think, problematic from a governmental perspective, because we have no idea.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Elizondo, were you read into the Immaculate Constellation program?
I would not be authorized to confirm nor deny the existence of any ongoing or past program, especially as it relates to a special access program, either by name or trigraph.
Okay, and then does the U.S. government or private contractors, do they work with other foreign countries, China, for example, to exchange data, quote, from a source, that intelligence data about UAP?
Let me see if I can answer that a little bit more generally, ma'am, if I may. We do have foreign material exploitation programs. That is something that is widely known, and that term itself is unclassified. How exactly that works becomes a bit sensitive. A discussion we could certainly have in a closed session if you like. We do work with international partners and allies quite often, not just in military exercises and workups, but in other intelligence efforts as well.
In terms of material that's given to private contractors, is certain material given to certain contractors because of their experience? So, for example, if it's related to submerged and undersea propulsion, would it go to a general contractor like General Dynamics?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely correct. Different contractors have different levels of expertise.
What's Lockheed's expertise?
Aerospace, ma'am.
In the UAP space, that's all that they wouldn't do submerged?
No, I didn't say that, ma'am.
Okay.
Lockheed Martin and others do quite a bit of work both in our atmosphere, in space, and even underwater. There are certain efforts to. It's a tough question you're asking. You put me on the spot here.
I'm looking for the answer.
Yes, ma'am. No, they are involved in a lot. I would rather let Lockheed Martin explain the different domains that they are involved with. Probably am not authorized to discuss that, but they are involved in a lot of different areas and domains.
Admiral, flight safety risks for our pilots. Yes, sir. Okay, my last question. The first hearing we had on this, I'd never been briefed on UAPs or what they were, biologics, non-human, et cetera. How would you define, each of you, my last question, how would you define non-human biologics, non-human intelligence? What are we actually talking about? Admiral, and we'll go down the line.
I don't think it's a stretch when you look at the diversity of life on this planet and the size of this universe to think that there would be more diverse, higher order, non-human intelligences throughout the universe. And that's probably what's visiting us.
I would take the scientific approach. The definition would be the ability to react to a stimulus in a manner that requires an intellectual thought process.
I just don't know.
I think we must be modest in our assumptions that we're looking for intelligence. That could be biological, it might not.
Well, thank you all for being here. And Madam Chairwoman, I'm out of breath because I sprinted to get here. But this is an important hearing. I think we all know that there's something going on. Mr. Elizondo, based on your knowledge of UAP sightings, do you believe it's fair to say that they are especially common near nuclear sites?
Yes, sir. Mr. Congressman, I absolutely am convinced of that, as are my colleagues inside the government.
And the reason why I pose that question, and this has been one of my talking points from the beginning, is, Oak Ridge is in Tennessee. The so-called weather balloon that drifted, that we now know was controlled, it passed near Oak Ridge. It obviously is a sensitive site, both of interest to our adversaries and to whatever else this is. Because we know that at military installations, at sensitive locations, such as nuclear facilities, that we're seeing this take place. So the question is what is it? Do you believe they've caused an irregular activity, and why might they be interested in those sites?
Sir, in some cases, it's actually regular activity. You'd be surprised. There's actually documentation right now that's been submitted. It's not just Oak Ridge. It's Savannah River site, SRS. It's also Los Alamos. A lot of our sensitive R&D locations appear to be under some sort of surveillance and monitoring. Why? Well, because a lot of innovation comes out of those areas, a lot of new technologies, a lot of, if you will, disruptive technologies that we use for our national defense originates out of those locations, and advanced concepts in physics as well. So if I was doing any type of reconnaissance, even on a foreign adversary, that's a great target to start with.
Sure, and again, this has been one of my talking points. I do have questions. What role might the Department of Energy or its subsidiaries or affiliates have in this type of technology, or possessing this type of technology, whether it's ours or others?